I'm Olivia, 25, a female, and my mother stole my boyfriend and convinced him to marry my sister. The words are a brutal summary of the day that changed everything, the day my life, my love, and my family were shattered into a million pieces. My boyfriend, Michael, was the love of my life, a brilliant and kind architect who saw the world with the same hopeful eyes I did. I was a graphic designer, a creative soul who found joy in making beautiful things. We were a perfect match, and our future together was meant to be a beautiful, vibrant canvas. But our happiness had a dark underbelly, my family. My mother, Victoria, was a socialite, a woman obsessed with maintaining a perfect public image. My sister, Sophie, 3 years younger than me, was a sweet and innocent girl who idolized my mother. The dynamic in our family was a strange, toxic dance of manipulation and emotional blackmail. My mother, Victoria, was the puppet master, and Sophie was her willing puppet. I, on the other hand, was the one who saw through the lies, the one who was always a step ahead of their game. My life, my love, my happiness was a threat to my mother's perfect world. The first few years of my relationship with Michael were a dream. We were inseparable, spending our days exploring the city, our nights talking about our future, our lives, our dreams. I was in love and I was happy. My mother, Victoria, however, was a constant nagging presence in our lives. She would call Michael at all hours with emergencies, demanding his attention, his time, his energy. She would constantly compare me to him, a subtle but effective form of emotional abuse. Michael is so driven, Olivia, she would say, her voice filled with a saccharine sweetness that made my skin crawl. He's going to be so successful. You're so creative, but you're not a go-getter like him. The words were meant to hurt, and they did. They were meant to sow seeds of doubt, of jealousy, of insecurity, and they did. Over the years, the subtle manipulations became a source of constant tension. My mother would constantly interrupt our dates, call us at all hours with emergencies, and demand our attention. My sister, Sophie, in her own way, was a part of the game. She would constantly ask Michael for advice, for help, for a shoulder to cry on. She was a master of the lie, a girl who could cry on command and feign a remorse that she never truly felt. I, in my quiet way, tried to stand up for myself, but my words were met with a cold, hard stare from my mother. The silent message was always the same. I was the bad guy for being angry. I was the one who was causing the problems. I was the one who was ruining the perfect family image. Then, everything changed. We were having a small, pre-engagement dinner at my parents' house. The evening was filled with a familiar tension. My mother, Victoria, in her usual fashion, had made a scene, demanding that Michael help her with a social media post. When Michael, exhausted from a long day of work, politely declined, my mother threw a tantrum. Sophie, in her usual fashion, rushed to my mother's defense, calling Michael selfish and unsupportive. I, in my quiet way, tried to stand up for Michael, but my words were met with a cold, hard stare from my mother. The evening ended in a tense silence, and we left, our hearts heavy with a sense of dread. The foreshadowing was so clear, but I was too naive to see it. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of dread. The pre-engagement tension was a heavy blanket that had settled over our small apartment. I knew the dinner had been a disaster, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I called my best friend, Liam, a voice of reason in the storm of my life. Liam had always been skeptical of my mother and sister's behavior, and he had always been there to provide me with a reality check. "Olivia, you've got to stand up for yourself," he said, his voice firm. "This is your life. This is your love. You can't let them walk all over you." His words were a much-needed wake-up call. I had been so focused on keeping the peace, on trying to be the good daughter, that I had forgotten to stand up for myself. I had forgotten that my feelings mattered, that my happiness mattered. I decided to go to my parents' house to talk to them, to confront them about their behavior, to make them see the damage they were doing to my relationship, to my life. The drive to their house was a short but tense journey. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Michael's car parked in the front. He was at home, which meant the drama was far from over. I walked up to the front door and knocked. My mother, Victoria, answered, her face a mask of fake smiles and polite greetings. "Olivia," she said, her voice filled with a saccharine sweetness that made my skin crawl, "we were just talking about you." I walked into the house, and the air was thick with a familiar tension. Michael was sitting on the couch, his face a mask of fake innocence. He was a master of the lie, a man who could cry on command and feign a remorse that he never truly felt. Sophie was sitting beside him, her face a mask of fake innocence. She was a master of the lie, a girl who could cry on command and feign a remorse that she never truly felt. My mother, Victoria, was sitting in the middle of the couch, a puppet master with her two puppets. I knew what was coming. I knew they were going to try to gaslight me, to make me feel bad for standing up for myself. I was prepared for a fight, a battle of wills, a war of words, but I was not prepared for what I was about to hear. My mother, Victoria, took a deep breath and she looked at me, her eyes filled with a new kind of resolve. "Olivia," she said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper, "we have something to tell you." The words hung in the air, a final, brutal truth. My heart, which had been so prepared for a verbal confrontation, was now a blank slate. I just stared at her, my eyes filled with a cold, hard fury. My mother, Victoria, took a deep breath and she looked at me, her eyes filled with a new kind of resolve. "Michael and Sophie are in love," she said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "They're getting married." The words hit me like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left me breathless, a lie so intricate and so bizarre that it still shocks me to this day. The foreshadowing was so clear, but I was too naive to see it. My mother's words hung in the air, a final, brutal truth that shattered my world into a million pieces. Michael and Sophie were in love. They were getting married. The lie, which had started as a way to protect Michael, was now a lie that had become her reality. I just stared at them, my eyes filled with a cold, hard fury. Michael, the love of my life, was sitting on the couch, his face a mask of fake innocence. He was a master of the lie, a man who could cry on command and feign a remorse that he never truly felt. Sophie, my sweet, innocent younger sister, was sitting beside him, her face a mask of fake innocence. She was a master of the lie, a girl who could cry on command and feign a remorse that she never truly felt. My mother, Victoria, was sitting in the middle of the couch, a puppet master with her two puppets. I walked out of the house, the words "they're getting married" echoing in my ears, my heart heavy with a sense of profound betrayal. I drove to Liam's house, the one place where I knew I would be safe, where I would be seen, where I would be heard. I walked into his house and I just stood there, unable to speak. Liam looked at me, his face filled with a quiet concern. "Olivia, what happened?" he asked. I just took a deep breath and I told him everything. I told him about the lie, about the betrayal, about my mother's manipulation, about Michael's complicity, about Sophie's betrayal. I told him that I was done. I was done with my family, done with the lies, done with the manipulation. "Liam," I said, my voice a low, dangerous whisper, "I can't marry Michael, not now, not like this. I can't marry into a family that will never see me, that will never value me, that will always choose her over me." The words hung in the air, a final, brutal truth. Liam was silent, and I could hear the sound of his quiet sobs. "Olivia," he whispered, his voice filled with a quiet devastation. "Please, don't do this." But I had to stand up for myself. I had to choose myself. I had to choose a future that was not filled with their lies, their manipulation, their emotional abuse. I had to choose a life that was not a war. My love, my life, my family were shattered into a million pieces, and I was the one who had to put them back together. The next few days were a blur of chaos and devastation. My mother and sister called, their voices filled with a fake, but convincing, remorse. They apologized for the misunderstanding, for the miscommunication. They said that Michael was so sorry, that he had no idea how much he had hurt me. They were still lying, still manipulating, still trying to gaslight me. I just hung up the phone. I was done with their lies. Michael, meanwhile, was a storm of emotions. He was hurt, he was angry, he was confused. He loved me, but he also loved my family. He was caught in the middle, a victim of my mother's deceit, just like me. We met at a small coffee shop, a neutral ground where we could talk without the drama, without the lies. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a quiet devastation. "Olivia," he said, his voice filled with a quiet sob, "what do we do?" I looked at him, and I saw a man who was a victim, a man who had been raised in a world of lies, a world of manipulation, a world of emotional abuse. I saw a man who was a victim of my mother's deceit, just like me. "Michael," I said, my voice a low, dangerous whisper, "you have to choose. You have to choose a future that is not filled with their lies, their manipulation, their emotional abuse. You have to choose a life that is not a war." The words hung in the air, a final, brutal truth. Michael was silent, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind. He loved my family, but he also loved me. He was a man who had to choose between a past that was filled with pain and a future that was filled with hope. He took a deep breath and he looked at me, his eyes filled with a new kind of resolve. "I choose you," he said, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. "I choose a future that is not filled with their lies, their manipulation, their emotional abuse. I choose a life that is not a war." The words were a beautiful, final vindication. We were a team, a small, independent unit that had been forged in the fire of my family's deceit. We were a couple who had been pushed to the edge, and in doing so, had learned to fly. We were no longer a victim of their lies. We were a survivor, and we were about to confront the family that had so profoundly betrayed us. The journey home was not a return. It was a reckoning. The next day, we went to my parents' house. The air was thick with a familiar tension, a tension that was a decade in the making. We walked into the house, and the silence was deafening. My mother, Victoria, was sitting on the couch, her face a mask of fake innocence. Sophie was sitting beside her, her face a mask of fake remorse. They were ready for a fight, a war of words, a battle of wills, but we were not here for a war, we were here for the truth. Michael looked at them, his eyes filled with a quiet devastation. "Mom, Sophie," he said, his voice a low, dangerous whisper, "we're not getting married, not now, not like this. We can't marry into a family that will never see us, that will never value us, that will always choose her over us." The words hung in the air, a final, brutal truth. My mother's face hardened, the mask of fake innocence falling away. "Michael, don't be ridiculous." My mother, Victoria, said, her voice a low, angry rumble. "This is just a misunderstanding. Sophie is so sorry." "No," Michael said, his voice firm. "It's not a misunderstanding. It's a decade of neglect. It's a lifetime of manipulation. It's a pattern of emotional abuse. You chose her over me. You chose her over us. And we're not going to be a part of it anymore." The words were a beautiful, final vindication. The family they had so desperately tried to save was gone, replaced by a hollow shell of what it once was. Their biggest fear, losing Sophie, had been the reason they lost us, and in the end they had lost us both in different, more profound ways. I looked at my mother, my eyes filled with a cold, hard fury. "You stole my girlfriend," I said, my voice a low, dangerous whisper. "You manipulated her, you gaslighted her, you turned her against me, and you did it out of jealousy, out of spite, out of a lifetime of entitlement. You were a broken person, Mom, and you were a victim of your own choices." The words were a final, brutal truth. My mother's face crumbled, the mask of fake remorse falling away, and she was left with nothing but her own shame. The confrontation was over, and the truth had been spoken. We left my parents' house, the silence a deafening testament to the end of a long, terrible war. We had lost a family, a home, and a future we had always believed in, but we had also gained something more precious, our freedom. We were no longer a victim of their lies, their manipulation, their emotional abuse. We were a survivor, and we were about to start a new chapter in our lives, a chapter that was free from their lies, their manipulation, their emotional abuse. We were scheduled the wedding. It was a small, intimate ceremony, a beautiful celebration of our love, our resilience, and our courage. We were surrounded by our friends, our chosen family, people who loved us without conditions, people who saw us, people who valued us. We were married in a small, beautiful garden, our hearts filled with a quiet, profound joy. I wore a new suit, a suit that was not a symbol of my love, but a symbol of our freedom. It was a suit that was not a product of their lies, but a product of our truth. It was a suit that was not a reflection of their betrayal, but a reflection of our resilience. I looked at Michael, my husband, my partner, my best friend. He was beautiful, radiant, and free. He had chosen me over her family, a choice that had cost him everything, but had also given him everything. He had found his voice, his strength, his courage. He was no longer a victim. He was a survivor, a man who had been pushed to the edge and in doing so had learned to fly. The future was not a war. It was a journey, a beautiful, unknown journey that we would embark on together. We were no longer a victim of their lies, their manipulation, their emotional abuse. We were a survivor, a couple who had been pushed to the edge and in doing so had learned to fly, and that was all the revenge we would ever need. After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories. We are all human. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon.